Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. As soon as my parents passed away, my husband Mike, having demolished our family home, stood in front of its site and blurted this out to me. Standing there in shock, I asked, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our place." At his words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. So that's what this was all about, I realized. Why are you laughing? Don't you guys know what I'm talking about? Mike and my in-laws looked at me quizzically as I laughed. It was then that I told them the truth. My name is Misery Nathaniel. I was born the eldest daughter to ordinary office worker parents. I have one brother, and we were a very normal family. I married Mike when I was 29, and we had 2 kids. Juggling work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 55. My son Sean and daughter Amelia had grown up to be fine adults, each living on their own and struggling with their new careers. Now was the time to relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but I was happy. I thought I would continue to age like this, but my mundane life changed one winter day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 72 at the time. Our whole family was engulfed in grief, especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't even eat. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you have to eat," I told her this time and time again. "I know, but I just don't have the appetite. It feels like there's something stuck in my chest." My brother and I thought she was just emotionally distressed and watched her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight in just half a month. Worried, I took her to the hospital. Cancer, the diagnosis from the doctor left me in shock. The cancer was advanced and surgery wasn't an option with about a year left to live. I hadn't had the chance to really take care of my parents yet. Just when I thought I had lost my father, now my mother too was facing this. I was even more devastated than when my father passed, but I didn't have the luxury of grieving forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon, so it was up to me to take care of my mother. I immediately told Mike that I wanted to live with my mother. I couldn't leave her alone both emotionally and physically in her illness. But Mike's reaction was unexpected. "What? We just finished dealing with your dad's funeral, and now have to be dragged into more of your family's issues," he said with a sigh, obviously annoyed. "You don't have to say it like that. Can't you just drive her to the hospital and back? Do we really have to live with her? I think she might feel lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I can just live at my family home for a while," I suggested. Then Mike became indignant. "What? And who's going to take care of my meals while you're gone?" "I'll come and cook, of course." "What about cleaning? Who's going to do the laundry?" I fell silent. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't do everything as before. Being confronted with this reality hurt. If someone said I was being selfish for wanting to care for and nurse my mother, I wouldn't be able to argue back. I'm sure my mother, being considerate, would say everything is fine as it is, but I really wanted to do something for my parents. "Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, you hear?" Mike grudgingly said to my silence. His attitude was arrogant, but he had ultimately agreed. "I'm sorry and thank you." Although I thought he was being awful, he had agreed to my wish. I suppressed my desire to argue back and thanked him. Despite the trouble, Mike and I started living with my mother at my family home. We had originally been living in a house provided by Mike's employer. Mike was an only child, and since his father really wanted us to live together, we hadn't planned on buying our own home and were eventually going to move in with Mike's parents. Living in the company housing was more convenient for work, and the rent was only about $600 a month, so it wasn't a big burden. But now that we've moved to my family home, we don't have to pay that anymore, and we have more space. I think living together wasn't all disadvantages for Mike. True to his word, he didn't help out with anything, but I was glad I could live with my mother. She seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepared her meals, fed her, and managed her medication. It would have been impossible for her to do all that alone. "I'm sorry, Misery. Thank you. It's a big help that you're here with me. I should thank Mike too," my mother said, expressing her gratitude to us many times. She was unaware of the harsh words Mike had said about living together, so she was grateful to him too. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed and Mike returned home, while serving dinner, I brought up the subject of my mother's treatment. Mike glared at me and said, "I don't know what you want me to say. I told you we're not helping with anything," refusing even to listen. I needed someone to vent to, someone to consult. All I wanted was for Mike to listen. Even after 1 month, 2 months, Mike's attitude didn't change. He constantly complained about living together, acting as if he was doing the great favor, and his behavior became increasingly obnoxious day by day. But I couldn't say anything against it. Between worrying about my mother and being considerate of Mike, I was becoming more stressed. Around the time of the 1 year prognosis, my mother's condition worsened rapidly. She was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Although I had prepared myself mentally, I was devastated. My brother's family and my children came right away and helped a lot. But in times like this, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Mike was laughing and chatting with his parents in a corner, not helping with the funeral preparations at all. My brother had taken a lead role in preparation, and somehow we got everything ready for the funeral. But Mike, who should have been sitting in the family section, was at the very back of the relative section. "Mike, I want you to sit in the family section," I said. But he replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all." "But you're my husband." Then his mother chimed in, "He's your husband, but he's not your mother's son. Mike is our son, so he's an outsider." "An outsider, you know?" "Yeah, Mike's parents are just us. Misery should sit in the family section." Hearing this from my in-laws, I was left speechless. In my cultural upbringing, it's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the family section at funerals. Though customs can vary, not finding Mike there sparked whispers among distant relatives, leading some to wonder if we had divorced. It was unsettling to hear gossip, especially when all of this could have been avoided if Mike had simply sat with me. Despite feeling disappointed that Mike wasn't by my side, we managed to bid my mother farewell peacefully. After the funeral, my brother's family, my children, Mike, and his parents returned to my family home. "Thank you for coming, especially during such a busy time," I said to my in-laws, offering them tea. They chuckled and responded, "Indeed, it's quite something. First your father, now your mother. These funeral expenses are a burden for us too, but at least that's over now." Their words stunned me. What did they mean by that? I couldn't believe they would say such a thing. I forced a smile and excused myself. That's when I overheard Mike talking with his parents. "It must have been tough for you, Mike, living with outsiders." "Yeah, dealing with misery's winds was a pain. A husband shouldn't just follow his wife's demands. If you don't like something, you have every right to refuse." I clenched my fists. Their conversation, filled with laughter and casual disrespect, was unbearable, though sadly not surprising. Mike's parents had always been insensitive and rude. When Mike and I got married, his mother remarked, "Couldn't you find someone more attractive? I can't expect much for grandchildren." His father joked, "They say beauty gets boring after 3 days. With misery you won't get bored," and Mike would just laugh along. Their disregard for basic decency grated on me deeply. Looking back, neither Mike nor his parents offered any comfort at my father's funeral or after my mother's passing. Instead, they mocked me. I had felt guilty about inconveniencing Mike, but now I questioned his character as a person. I had sacrificed too much of myself trying to please Mike, especially when he wasn't supportive in return. As I seethed with anger, Mike and his parents continued their light-hearted chatter in the next room. If my brother's family or my kids had overheard them, it would have upset them, but fortunately, they were in the kitchen. I felt a strange relief in being the only one privy to Mike and his parents' conversation. Then, I heard my mother-in-law call my name. "Misery," she said. Startled, I replied, "Yes." "Can I have this?" she asked, holding my mother's purse. Confused, I hesitated. Well, your mother won't be needing it anymore, right?" Mike interjected. "I might as well take it home. Maybe I'll keep it," she suggested, holding up the purse and examining it. I couldn't believe her audacity, especially so soon after the funeral. I took the purse from her firmly and said, "No, you can't." "What?" Her expression shifted, less about losing the purse and more about me, her daughter-in-law, stating up to her. Yet I held my ground. "We're not ready to sort through my mother's belongings yet. We'll distribute her keepsakes among the family later." My mother-in-law flushed with anger. "What do you mean? Are you implying I'm an outsider? You said at the funeral that even Mike was an outsider to my mother." "How is Mike an outsider but your family isn't?" she retorted. Her words made Mike and his father also turn red. "What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. That's disrespectful, a daughter-in-law talking like that." Their argument drew everyone from the other room. I hadn't expected to be accused of treating them like outsiders after all their effort to attend the funeral. "Let's go home, Dad." My mother-in-law shouted at me in front of everyone and stormed out of our house. Surprisingly, even Mike was angry and left with his parents. "What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law an outsider?" Everyone asked me, having heard only her side. Taken out of context, it might have seemed like I was being harsh, but I explained the situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me. Grandpa and Grandma should be more considerate of other people's feelings. That's just how Dad and Grandma and Grandpa have always been. My children sided with me. Despite their support, I still couldn't forgive those three. Mike hadn't come home for a while since that day. I hadn't contacted him either. I didn't think I should be the one to apologize, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive him even if he did. But I knew things couldn't stay this way forever. Then one day, Mike came back. "Welcome home," I greeted him, suppressing the anger that flared up at the sight of him. "It's been tough, huh?" His gruff words were an attempt at showing concern, and I was taken aback. "Take the kids and go on a trip. It'll be a good change of scenery for you." With that, he handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Instead of words, tears started streaming down my face. It might have been the kids' idea, but I was deeply touched that Mike had gone along with it. I immediately contacted the kids to plan the trip. "Really, Dad suggested this?" "That's surprising," the kids exclaimed, clearly taken aback by the gesture. It was evident that it truly was a gift from Mike. "I wonder if Dad feels bad about what happened," I chuckled, gratefully accepting the travel vouchers from Mike. "I'll be off then." "Yeah, take your time. Stay with the kids at their places too. Why not?" "Really? I can't be away that long." "Don't worry about me. I'll relax at my parents'. Just enjoy yourself." With that, Mike sent me off. Amelia was thrilled to have me visit, so before the spa trip, I stopped by her place and then Scene's. I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for my mother, so I helped out by cooking and freezing meals for them. "Mom, you should relax, but thanks. This really helps," they both said, delighted to have my cooking at home. This opportunity was all thanks to Mike's suggestion. And then came the eagerly awaited spa trip. I spent a rejuvenating time at the hot springs with my children. The weariness from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents seemed to have eased considerably. I was away for almost a week, and both my kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad for once. True, just this once. But I wonder if he's up to something, Amelia joked. "Don't say that. Dad thought about us in his own way," I laughed. When I returned home, planning to share the memories with Mike and start our life anew as a couple, I was left speechless. "What? The house is?" I looked around in disbelief. Despite recognizing the location, the family home that should have been there was gone. Then, out of nowhere, Mike appeared, followed by his parents. They were grinning at me, stating they're dumbfounded. "Mike, what's going on?" I asked. With that sickening smile, Mike replied, "Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house." "What are you talking about?" I replied, trying to stay calm. Then he continued, "Have you lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Bring the inheritance to our place quickly." "Whatever you inherited, it's Mike's now." It dawned on me then that the disappearance of the house was orchestrated by Mike, all for the sake of the inheritance. The betrayal cut deep. On my way home, thoughts of the future filled me with indescribable sadness and anger. But demolishing the house wouldn't make things go Mike's way. I wouldn't allow it. I couldn't help but burst into laughter at the sight of their smirking faces. My laughter baffled Mike and his father. "What? Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy?" My mother-in-law regarded me with a mix of disbelief and disdain. Facing the three of them, I spoke up. "Don't you guys know what you're talking about?" I said to them. "First off, I haven't inherited a single penny, so there's no inheritance." After saying that, I burst into laughter again. It seemed they had wildly imagined they would become rich from the inheritance. Their absurd assumptions and actions struck me as ludicrous. "What do you mean? Explain yourself," Mike demanded. But I remained silent. I felt no obligation to explain myself to them. And besides, I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, go ahead alone. Ignoring Mike's question and dismissing his initial proposal only seemed to infuriate my mother-in-law further. "You helped with your parents' house, but you won't do ours. Do you realize the situation here? I agreed to live together, didn't I?" she retorted. I never wanted to live together in the first place. Have you forgotten that you insisted on this to avoid housework? I countered each of their arguments, leaving Mike and his mother biting their lips in frustration. And demolishing the family home like that. There are lines you just shouldn't cross. I yelled at them before storming away. Where are you going? Mike called after me, but I didn't look back. Right now, I needed to find a place to spend the night, away from Mike's presence. I promptly sought legal counsel. Demolishing the house couldn't be so straightforward. The house still legally belonged to my mother. As I contemplated which company might have been involved, a shocking truth emerged. Mike and his father had demolished it themselves. His father, who worked in demolition, had enlisted acquaintances and rented heavy machinery for the task. It was a meticulously planned operation, and to think they had even sent me away with travel vouchers to facilitate their scheme. Tears welled up in my eyes as the extent of their deception sank in, and the anger and frustration were overwhelming. Is there any way to hold all three accountable for this? I tearfully asked the lawyer, explaining my situation. The lawyer looked at me kindly and said, Mike unlawfully demolished a property that belonged to your mother. He could be charged with property destruction and held liable for damages. Let's begin by demanding a formal apology from Mike and his parents. I nodded in agreement, and the lawyer swiftly initiated the necessary legal actions. A few days later, I received an enraged call from Mike about the legal notice he had received. What? What's with this certified letter? I asked, my voice rising with disbelief. Oh, you got it. You destroyed my precious house. Of course you have to compensate, I retorted firmly. Compensate? We said we were moving to my parents' place. I demolished the house that nobody was going to live in. You should be thanking me, not asking for compensation. Now bring the inheritance and come back home, Mike replied arrogantly. Thank me for demolishing my house. Don't make me laugh. And what inheritance? It hasn't even been settled yet, I shot back over the phone. Mike fell silent, evidently surprised by the intensity of my anger, a rare display from me. The reason I had laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had cherished a whole year with my mother. It was obvious we would eventually discuss inheritance matters, so I had told my brother I didn't want anything and transferred it all to him, cash and stocks. He insisted I take the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I didn't intend to live there, it could be rented out. That had been the plan for me to inherit the house. Either you and your father restore the house to its original state or pay the amount specified in the letter. That's non-negotiable. I was willing to settle this amicably, but if you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you, I declared firmly. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd get so angry, Mike mumbled in response. Of course I'm angry. What did you expect? I snapped back. He started making excuses, trying to justify his actions. It seemed he believed that by demolishing my family home, he could avoid living with his parents. His father had always wanted us to live together. Mike's father had a soft spot for Sean and hoped to live with him. Mike had previously refused to live together due to commuting difficulties, but his parents seemed to think it was me who opposed the idea. So, he had orchestrated the demolition of my house, making it appear that I would move in with them after inheriting whatever was left. But after hearing all this, forgiveness was out of the question. Please give me a break. I didn't mean any harm. Dad's sorry too, Mike pleaded over the phone. If he's truly sorry, then agree to the settlement, I replied tersely and hung up. Mike continued to call and message, expressing apologies. If you're sorry, just transfer the money, I texted back, pushing him away. I knew deep down that my childhood home couldn't be restored, but demanding compensation was the only way I could cope with my overwhelming emotions. Afterward, I stayed at Amelia's place. My brother's family and my children were aware of the situation. Though my brother must have been furious about our house being demolished without his consent, he supported my decision, saying, I won't interfere, but I'll help in any way I can. Do what you think is best, misery. Everyone condemned Mike's actions and stood by me. A month passed without any compensation or settlement from Mike. There was complete silence from his end. I couldn't stay with Amelia indefinitely. I needed the money urgently to rebuild some semblance of stability. But against my hopes, something shocking unfolded. Amelia brought it to my attention. This apron looks a lot like Grandma's, she said, showing me her smartphone screen. I was stunned when I saw it, a listing on a flea market app. The apron Amelia pointed out was unique, one I had personally made for my mother. What? This is Grandma's apron. I recognize it. I exclaimed. Amelia swiftly checked other listings. The seller appeared to be new to the app, with no transactions or reviews yet. To my horror, nearly 30 items were listed, all belonging to my mother. It was undeniable. Mike was behind this. He was the only one who could have taken my mother's belongings after demolishing the house. I wasted no time and immediately called Mike. "What's this about the app?" I demanded, my voice filled with anger. "App?" Mike responded, sounding annoyed. His reaction only fueled my fury, convinced he was feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things without permission, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now," I insisted firmly. Mike's panicked reply came swiftly. "What? No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over right now to get everything back," I declared, hanging up the phone abruptly. Without wasting a moment, I headed straight to Mike's parents' house with Amelia and Tao. "Where are Mom's things?" I demanded the moment we arrived, calling out for Mike. Confronting him at the door, he stuttered nervously. I don't know anything about it." "Tell the truth, Dad," Amelia chimed in, adding to the pressure on Mike. He appeared visibly flustered. Mike's parents, noticing our arrival, came out to see what was happening. "Oh, Amelia, you're here," Mike's mom greeted with a smile at her granddaughter's presence. Amelia, clearly upset, didn't hold back. "Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth." "The truth?" "Grandma's belongings, who recently passed away. Dad seems to be selling them," Amelia accused, her voice tinged with anger. Mike's mom surprisingly burst into laughter at the accusation. Meanwhile, Mike looked troubled and kept repeating, "It really wasn't me." Then his mother loudly exclaimed, "Mike is selling them. That's impossible because I am the one selling them." My blood ran cold at her words. It was evident Mike was aware of it. He looked at his mother with an expression that betrayed his knowledge of the situation. Despite Amelia's shock, his mother continued cheerfully, "What? It's a lot of work, you know. I have to pack everything carefully and make sure the photos look good." She seemed oblivious to the gravity of her actions, casually discussing her new hobby on the app. Struggling to contain my anger, I fought the urge to confront her. "Cancel the listings. Those items aren't yours to sell," Amelia pleaded, her voice trembling with anger and tears welling up in her eyes. Mike's mother appeared annoyed by Amelia's protest. "What's the harm? I've found something I enjoy doing. I use what I can and sell the rest for a little extra money. It's good for keeping my mind active. Since I'm the only grandma left, Amelia wants me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she remarked nonchalantly, showing no remorse for her actions. Realizing reasoning with her was futile, I made a decisive move. "If talking won't work, we'll take action. Amelia, let's go," I urged, pulling her away from the house. We headed straight to the police station. While I hadn't intended to involve the police over the house demolition, theft was a different matter. I explained to the police how my late mother's belongings were being stolen and sold without consent. They acted swiftly, suspending Mike's mother's account on the flea market app to prevent further sales of the stolen items. On our way back from the station, I called Mike. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you?" "You're complicit," I accused firmly. "No, I've actually filed a police report about this. Please cooperate with the investigation," Mike responded frantically, his voice betraying his anxiety. "What? We're family, right? Withdraw it, please." "Family? You haven't paid any compensation for the house, nor alimony, and there's no sign of remorse," I retorted loudly, catching Mike off guard. Despite everything, I still harbored feelings for Mike after living together for so long. Letting out a sigh, I continued, "I'll wait for the money, but I won't overlook the theft. Return everything. By the way, Mike, your father seemed quite unwell. Has he seen a doctor?" "What?" Mike responded in confusion. Passing on that message, I ended the call. Mike's father, whom I had seen recently, appeared alarmingly thin and hadn't spoken much. His complexion was unnaturally dark, indicating significant health issues. It seemed his family hadn't noticed his declining health. His wife was casually selling stolen items, and Mike only put on a tough front with me, showing a lack of genuine concern for others. The following day, I received an unexpected call from Mike's father. Anticipating a thank you call, I was met with criticism instead. "What do you mean treating me like I'm sick? Planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of the hassle? I need to protect Mike and my wife from you. I'm not going to any hospital," he rebuked sharply. It was surprising to be scolded when my intention was purely concern. Sorry if I overstepped. I was just worried, I replied, trying to calm the situation. Humph, I'm not fragile or short-lived like your parents. Don't underestimate me, he snapped dismissively. Despite my indignation, a few days later, he reluctantly visited the hospital due to worsening symptoms. The diagnosis was devastating: terminal cancer. Mike called me in a panic soon after. Dad's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. What should I do? Mike's voice trembled with fear and uncertainty. I couldn't help but snort bitterly in response. I don't know. What did you say? I told you when I suggested going to the hospital, he brushed it off, saying he's not frail like your parents. So figure it out yourself. You're heartless misery. I never thought you'd say something like that. Who's heartless here? Did you ever offer any comfort when my mother was sick? Think about your own actions, I retorted before hanging up. As expected, Mike's father passed away shortly after. Despite being a compassionate person, I found it difficult to mourn his passing considering everything that had transpired. After his funeral, his will was discovered. Despite his earlier bravado about not being short-lived, he had made meticulous arrangements. The house goes to my grandson Sean. The rest of my estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son. Seeing Sean's name in the will surprised me. Mike's father had always favored him, expressing a desire to live with him. It seemed he intended for Sean to inherit the house even after his death, a responsibility Sean wasn't particularly enthusiastic about. Sean, consider renouncing the inheritance. You don't really need that house, do you? I advised him, but Sean was genuinely pleased to receive it. Despite the inheritance tax making it more of a burden than a boon, if Sean was happy, I had no right to interfere. Following the terms of the will, Sean assumed ownership of the house, and his grandmother happily paid the inheritance tax. He's our heir, after all, she remarked contentedly. In a way, she was right, though I felt a twinge of sadness, almost as if Sean had been taken away from me. What happened next was utterly unexpected. Come over to our house. Mike's call prompted me to head straight to his parents' place. As I arrived, I saw Mike's mother and Mike standing in front of their house, both looking stunned, much like I had once been. The scene before us was chaotic, filled with heavy machinery, trucks bearing the names of demolition companies, and workers in motion. Their house was being torn down right before our eyes. What's going on? This is my house. I can do what I want with it, Sean declared, appearing from somewhere and looking satisfied as he observed the demolition. Sean, what are you doing? Stop this immediately, I pleaded. Stopping it now won't make it livable anyway, Sean retorted. Sean, what have you done? Mike's mother and Mike were pleading with Sean, but he just laughed. Did you forget what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Gran, you were awful to Mom too, right? Have you ever apologized? Sean's smile turned into a sharp glare directed at Mike's mother and Mike. They sank to their knees in despair as the heavy machinery continued its noisy work, dismantling their house. Witnessing this scene, I finally felt a sense of relief. Later on, Mike finally paid the damages and compensation from the inherited assets. The stolen items that Mike's mother had taken from my mother were retrieved by Sean and safely returned to me. You always have me and Amelia, Sean reassured me, and finally tears of relief streamed down my face. Mike's mother and Mike, now without a home and financial stability, had to return to company housing. While Mike and I had moved out of there, they were now the subject of gossip and speculation. I explained the whole truth to a friend whose husband worked with Mike, and I knew she would spread the news. It seemed Mike and his mother would face hardships ahead, especially after Mike's retirement when they'd need to save up for a new place to live. Occasionally, I find myself wondering how Mike and his mother are coping in their current situation, but I refrain from asking. I continued to stay at Amelia's house until Sean announced his engagement. With plans to build a new home, using the proceeds from selling the land of our former family home, I was pleased to see that the legacy of that house was being put to good use. Mom, come live with us, Sean warmly invited me, his fiancée echoing the sentiment with a smile. Knowing I couldn't indefinitely impose on Amelia's hospitality, I gratefully accepted Sean's offer. I look forward to living happily with my new family and am determined not to repeat the mistakes of my own mother-in-law.